Thomas was 8 years old when his family moved into an old farmhouse in Pennsylvania. It was the kind of house that looked like it had come straight out of a Gothic tale, with its weathered wooden facade and large windows that seemed more like dark eyes staring at the road. For a child with a vivid imagination, that place was the perfect setting for adventures that blurred the line between reality and fantasy. Thomas could hardly wait to explore every corner, even those his parents found a bit creepy. Little did he know, that house held secrets his young mind wasn't prepared to comprehend. In the first week, Thomas discovered the house had a basement, something that immediately caught his attention. The basement was different from the other rooms, and there was a certain mystique surrounding it. It was at the end of a narrow, dark hallway, with an old wooden door that looked like it had never been opened. His parents said it was just for storage, but to Thomas, it represented a new and mysterious world. He loved descending those creaky wooden stairs, feeling the faint light from the ceiling bulb struggle to reach the corners of the basement. It was a cold and damp place, with the distinct smell of old wood and moisture. On that particular night, Thomas decided to explore the basement on his own. His parents were busy organizing things upstairs, and he saw the perfect opportunity for his adventure. He went down the stairs with a small, portable flashlight he had found in his dad's toolbox. The ceiling light flickered a few times before stabilizing, but its glow was weak and yellowed, as if it were fighting to stay on. The basement was filled with old boxes, furniture draped in white sheets, and shelves full of items he didn't recognize. Every object seemed to have a story to tell, and Thomas, with his childlike curiosity, wanted to discover them all. But as he explored, something strange happened. Thomas heard a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible noise coming from a dark corner of the basement. At first he thought it was just the sound of the house settling, as his mother always said. But the sound persisted, growing clearer. It sounded like a whisper, a low voice he couldn't quite understand. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He moved closer to the sound, shining his flashlight into the dark corner. That's when he saw something he would never forget. A figure, indistinct and shrouded in shadows, with the shape of a man wearing a straw hat. Thomas froze. The figure didn't seem threatening, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. It was as if the man was just watching, waiting for something. Thomas's mind was a mix of confusion and fascination, and he didn't know whether to run or get closer. Before he could make any decision, the figure moved. Slowly, it leaned forward as if it were about to speak, but no sound came out. Despite his fear, Thomas felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if this man, or whatever it was, wasn't a complete stranger. Determined to face his fear, Thomas took a step forward. The figure didn't retreat. Instead, it seemed to become clearer, as if the darkness around it was slightly fading. The man, or perhaps the spirit of a man, raised a hand and pointed to one of the basement shelves. Thomas, still clutching his flashlight, followed the gesture with his eyes. There, on the dusty shelf, was a small wooden box he hadn't noticed before. It seemed out of place among the other old, forgotten items. Without thinking too much, Thomas approached and reached out to grab the box. As his fingers touched the cold wood, he heard the voice for the first time, a raspy whisper that seemed to come from all around him at once. "Open it." Thomas's hand trembled, but he obeyed. The lid of the box opened with a soft creak, revealing something wrapped in an old cloth. Carefully, he unfolded the cloth, revealing an antique pocket watch made of silver. The object seemed well cared for, despite the dust covering the box. Thomas held the watch, feeling its weight in his hands. He opened it, and to his surprise, the watch was still working, ticking steadily. That's when he felt something change in the room. The presence of the man with the straw hat began to fade, as if dissolving into the air, and the darkness around him became less oppressive. Thomas didn't know how to explain what was happening. His young mind was in turmoil, trying to reconcile what he saw with what he knew to be real. But he also felt, in some inexplicable way, that the man was thanking him. Maybe the watch had belonged to him, or perhaps it was an object of special significance, something that had been waiting to be found for a long time. The basement, which once seemed so frightening, now seemed to have lost some of its threatening mystery. When the figure finally disappeared completely, Thomas was still holding the watch, eyes fixed on the spot where the man had stood. He climbed the stairs back to the living room, where his parents were busy talking about the changes they would make to the house. They hadn't noticed his absence, and Thomas decided not to tell them what had happened. He felt this was an experience he needed to keep to himself, something no one else would understand. He put the watch back in the box and hid it in the back of his drawer, feeling that somehow he was responsible for keeping it safe. Weeks went by, and although Thomas didn't return to the basement, he often thought about the man with the straw hat. There was something almost comforting about his presence, despite the initial fear. Sometimes, when he was alone in his room, he would take out the box and open the pocket watch, listening to the soft ticking that seemed to fill him with a sense of calm. Deep down, he knew the basement held more secrets than he could imagine, but for now, he was satisfied with the mystery he had already uncovered. Over time, the house became less frightening to Thomas. He began exploring it during the day, discovering other nooks and rooms that had been forgotten over the years. There was still something peculiar about some places, like the attic full of old boxes his parents hadn't sorted through yet. But nothing seemed as fascinating as the basement. He could still feel the presence of that man, even if subtly, like a persistent shadow in his memory. Thomas's experiences in that house profoundly shaped his perception of the world around him. He began paying more attention to small things, the sounds houses make when they're quiet, the shadows that move in the corner of his eye, and the inexplicable feelings of being watched. The encounter with the man in the straw hat made him question reality and the supernatural in a way that few children his age would. As the years passed, Thomas grew up and left the house of his childhood behind, but the memory of that basement and what he found there never left him. Even as an adult, he occasionally found himself thinking about the pocket watch and the shadowy figure that pointed him to it. It was as if that experience had left an indelible mark on his mind, something he couldn't, or perhaps didn't want to, forget. Once during his teenage years, Thomas decided to revisit the house with his parents during a trip to town. They were greeted by the new owners, a young family who had made some renovations to the house. Thomas, now with a different perspective on things, asked permission to see the basement again. He went down the same creaky wooden stairs, now much smaller than he remembered, and found the place almost unrecognizable, clean, organized, and without the heavy atmosphere of before. However, something drew him to a dark corner of the basement, where an old shelf was still intact. He approached it and, to his surprise, saw that the small wooden box was there, exactly where he had found it years before. When he opened the box, the pocket watch was still there, intact and silent, as if it had been waiting for him. Thomas took the watch in his hands, feeling its familiar weight, and realized that despite everything, there was still a connection between him and the house's past. After that visit, Thomas took the watch with him, now as a symbol of an important chapter in his life. He kept it in a special place, knowing that somehow that object represented more than just a childhood memory. It was a bridge to a mystery he might never fully understand. Thomas's life moved on, with him growing up and facing the challenges of adulthood. But whenever he felt lost or in need of comfort, he would open the drawer where he kept the watch and listen to its soft ticking, feeling a connection to the inexplicable that had always accompanied him. The man in the straw hat and the dark basement remained as vivid memories in his mind, reminding him that sometimes the world is far more mysterious than we can comprehend.